Welcome to Mr. Nightmare Dating. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the dating horror stories. Right, let's get comfy and relax. Story 1. I always tell this as a cautionary tale that has actually happened to me, especially in light of all of the terrifying, heartbreaking news stories of girls who get into Ubers and are never seen again. This happened when I was in college. It's one of the bigger party schools, with an entire street of bars you can wander to and from. My boyfriend, now fiancé, had gone back to his hometown for the weekend, so I decided to go out with some friends. I'm sure you can see where this is going. I had a bit too much to drink and was on the edge of a blackout. Knowing with my whole mind, body and soul that I did not want to become a liability for my friends for the rest of the night, I told them I was going to Uber home. My friends insisted on coming home with me. But selfishly, I wanted to call my boyfriend when I got home and have a bed to myself, so I told them all no, but took a screenshot of my driver's name and info on the app and sent it to them. When he got close I hugged them all and walked out the door. Like I said earlier, it's a big party school with lots of bars in one area, so the entire strip is lined with Ubers from about 11 p.m. to 3. It was almost bar close, so there were a ton, and look, I was hammered. I don't even know what a Toyota Yaris looks like at the best of times. So as I'm searching, a man rolled his window down and asked if I was waiting for an Uber. I said yes. He told me he wasn't my Uber, but if I canceled my ride and accepted his, then he would take me home. I was already thinking of the leftovers I had in my fridge at this point, so I agreed, canceled my Uber and linked my account up with his. He was super nice, and he was an Uber. I've heard stories of fake Uber drivers, so I did make sure he was legit. He called me beautiful a few times right off the bat, but hey, I was a girl in college. I got that a lot. I remember we talked about our favorite books. I told him I was an English major, and he was super interested in listening to me talk about tutoring ESL students in my free time on campus. He was an immigrant who had to learn to speak English, so we lamented about how awful it is to learn such an intricate language, but how rewarding the successes were in the end. When he missed the turn-in for my apartment complex, I figured it must have been because he was distracted by our conversation. I politely pointed out that he missed the turn-in, and he said he'd turn back around. Rather than making a U-turn, though, he took the longest way to get back to my apartment. I was still in familiar territory, so I at least knew that he was going in the right direction, but I was starting to get nervous. It was around 2:30 at this time, and it was super dark and no one was awake, let alone outside. When he missed the turn-in again, I asked if I could just get out and make it back on my own. He seemed kind of offended, like he was surprised that I wasn't as engrossed in our conversation as he was. I kind of jokingly told him that I was a broke college student, and he was racking up my bill during a surge. That seemed to straighten things out a bit. He was all, "Oh, I completely understand," and turned back toward my complex. I was honestly so freaked out and drunk at this point that as soon as he pulled into my complex I was like, "Okay, right here is fine. Thank you," and pulled on the door handle when he came to a stop. It didn't open. I hit the little lock latch. Still nothing. "Let's go get coffee," he said. He clicked the button in the app to say the trip was completed and clicked out of the app. At this point, I'm just trying not to look as freaked out as I feel. I told him I was tired, and it was late, and coffee was the last thing I needed at the moment. I tried the door again, just to make sure I wasn't drunk and handling the door wrong. Still didn't open. "We should just sit here and talk until you're feeling better," he was explaining to me. "We can go somewhere more private, too, if you'd like. Do you live alone up there?" At this point, I'm frantically digging through my purse for my phone. Fuck being polite. When he asked what I was doing, I told him I promised my boyfriend I'd call him once I was home safely. Wrong thing to say. He got pissed that I had a boyfriend and didn't tell him about it. He asked what his name was, what he did for a living, and where he was right now at this very second. When I gave half-hearted answers, he got even angrier. He demanded to know why a boyfriend of mine would be stupid enough to leave his girl alone with another man, him. He repeated it twice. At this point, I'm trying not to cry. When I figured my phone must have fallen under the seat, I started digging around down there. He demanded to know what I was doing. I gave my best impression of a genuine laugh and said I dropped my phone. He told me to stop digging around in his things immediately. I stopped. Mind you, I'm still drunk as hell at this point. I was just trying to keep my shit together and not vomit or pass out. I tried the door a third time. Still nothing. He asked if I wanted to get coffee again. Even kind of begged a little. I told him no, I just needed sleep. He asked if I lived alone again. I lied and told him I had a roommate. He asked if it was my boyfriend, and I said no. He kinda got angry again, and then straight up asked if I'd made my boyfriend up. I told him no, and he got angrier, and again asked why he would leave me alone with another man like this. I'm usually pretty good at reading people, and I got the vibe that this guy thought he was a knight compared to my boyfriend. So I lied. Through my teeth. I told him I was going to break things off with my boyfriend, that we weren't even really that serious, that he was an idiot to leave me alone like this. Thank whatever fucking God was watching over me, but that did it. He calmed down and said that changed things. He asked if I wanted to get coffee again, and I changed my answer to not tonight. He asked for my number, and I gave it to him. He called to make sure it was my real number. My phone buzzed from between my seat and the door, and I fished it out. He grabbed my phone from me and demanded I show him my boyfriend's contact info. When I did, he deleted it and gave me a big smile. Feels good, doesn't it? I told him yes. He put his number in my phone and gave it back. I told him good night in the hopes that he would release me, and he told me he'd like to talk for just a little longer. I had to stay locked in that car with him until 4:30 in the morning. I don't even remember what we talked about. He asked if he could hold my hand at one point, to which I said I needed to break up with my boyfriend before I did anything with another man. He liked that answer, thankfully. When he finally let me out, the door was child locked, so could only be opened from the outside. The windows were locked too. I walked up the wrong building steps and crouched down in the shadows of some random person's door until he drove off. I sat for another 10 minutes and then sprinted to my apartment. After crying on the floor in my kitchen for a while, I called my boyfriend and explained to him what happened. His response was the one I get from everyone when I tell this story: report that fuck to Uber. But even though he didn't know which building in my complex I lived in, he still knew where I lived. I was terrified of seeing him again. I was terrified of calling an Uber. To this day I refuse to Uber alone, and I make sure I have my phone in my hand every time I get into an Uber now. I realize this could have been a lot worse, and maybe he was a good guy with the wrong line of thinking, and he did mean well, but I was terrified I wasn't going to make it to my apartment that night. Please be cautious when getting an Uber. Don't be like me. So, Uber driver from hell, I know we've technically met before, but I'm going to have to rain check on that coffee date, forever. Let's not meet. Edit. Hey guys, just a few things to note since there's a lot of genuine concern, thank you, in the comments right now. The linking Uber accounts paragraph was very poorly explained, sorry. I make it sound like some virtual magic happened, when in reality, I just canceled my ride and requested a new one, and he made sure to accept the ride I requested. He read my name off and showed me his phone to confirm it was me, and then I read his name off and showed him my phone to confirm it was him once he accepted my request. That's what I mean by linking. For my boyfriend's number being deleted, he deleted the contact, but I still had text messages with him and group chats with him in it. So his number was still there, just not the name assigned to it. I just went back to my texts and added his name again. As for reporting it, this is when I shamefully admit that I am not brave. I really did fear that if he got into trouble, he could easily link it back up to me, and he knew where I lived at the time. This apartment was the best I could find with how much I could afford for rent, and it was selfish and cowardly to keep it from authorities, I admit it. I'm hoping a braver person reported him if he ever acted like that again. This happened to me in 2016, so I'm not sure if reporting it now would do much. But if anyone thinks so, please let me know and I will share my story and evidence with the local police. All of the tips people are sharing with me are so helpful. Unfortunately, I learned them after the incident, but now I do have them and can ride safely from now on, and make sure my friends ride safely as well. Recently, someone on Reddit shared a video of a woman showing how you can surreptitiously check to see if child lock is on your door. It was definitely a facepalm moment for me, and now I do that before getting into an Uber every time. Story 2. This particular experience was not as obviously life-threatening, but was a doozy of a night, y'all. I'll let you be the judge. And sorry for formatting on mobile. Background. This happened about 7 years ago. I'm female, 5 feet 2 inches and petite, so I try to be extra careful because I've had some pretty close calls. This night I clearly had a lapse in judgment. Also, I don't do hard drugs, but during my college years I drank a fair amount and smoked copious amounts of marijuana. Presenting, my date from hell. I waited tables for 7 years, working my way through college. I served all kinds of people during that time, and grew very comfortable working with the general public, playing up small talk, putting on a friendly demeanor, and more importantly, waiting the hell out of some tables. I was good at my job, so I enjoyed my work most of the time aside from the occasional douchebag customer. My restaurant was right off the highway, next to several large hotels. Most ran between $90 to $150 a night. Not the worst, not the best. I'd often get tables who were staying at these hotels whom would walk over for a meal more than one night in a row if they were staying longer than one day. This is how I met Bob. Bob came in on a busy night, sat quietly by himself, and required minimal effort. He ordered only cobbler and coffee, which he ate quickly. I sent him on his way, to go coffee in hand, with very minimal small talk. I noticed he smiled at me, eyes lingering a bit longer than normal, and immediately knew he was interested in me. Most women know the look. Despite this, he left without saying anything else, and I thought that was the end of it. He also left me a fat tip. Since he had a small order, it was almost 90% gratuity. Hell yeah. The next night at work, he's back. He's requested my section this time. Again orders modestly, no actual meal. Leaves a great tip, but barely says more to me than the few words it takes to place his order. Cool. Minimal effort. Maximum reward. I dig it. We repeat this 3 nights in a row, until finally at the end of night 3 he opens up and tells me a bit about himself. He is staying at the hotel next door for his job working on cell phone towers and telephone poles. He will be in the area for several months. He shows me pictures on his phone of him in gear at the top of very high towers, and his story seems to check out. He wraps all this info up by asking for my phone number. I did find him relatively attractive. Not crazy good looking, but he had a nice smile. He was barrel-chested, a big dude, with curly hair that was shaggy but nice. The kinds of curls women pay big money for, I thought. I was a bit lonely at the time, and he seemed normal, so I agreed to give him my number. Over the next few days we made small talk, but nothing substantial. Looking back, aside from his employment, I learned almost nothing about Bob during this conversation period. Nothing that sticks with me anyways. It was all meaningless small talk via TXT. Finally, I agreed to grab a drink with him on 4th of July weekend, and having no prior plans for the holiday, I was excited to have something to do. Usually I would have insisted I meet him somewhere public to protect myself, but I had been interacting with him for over a week, so my guard was dropping. Stupid, right? He suggested we smoke prior to hitting the bar. I liked this idea, and not wanting to go to his hotel room for obvious reasons, I reluctantly agree my place would probably be best since it's closer to downtown. I give him my apt information, my 1-bedroom apartment where I live alone. This was stupid of me. The night arrives and he's punctual. Both of us have some weed. We are very well supplied. It's important to mention, I am also a very experienced smoker and had lots of different methods for us to choose from. Pipes, steamrollers, papers, blunt wraps, etc. I ask his preferred method, and he says bong. Of course, the one thing I don't have. Mine had recently broken. I tell him so and suggest a blunt or a bowl, but he insists he wants a bong rip. I tell him I don't know where we'd get a bong this late. He insists he knows where and must have a bong rip, so I allow him to ferry me to a shadier gas station in the area, where he purchases not only a large glass bong, but also a grinder and lighter, even though I have us well supplied at the home. We return. He gets his bong hit. I find that whole thing odd, but brush it off and enjoy my buzz. Bob has me roll a joint after several bong hits. I finish and go to light it, and he stops me. Let's smoke that on the way to the bar. He says. I live less than a 10-minute drive from the bars and tell him so. I also tell him that it's a holiday weekend, so cops will be out in full force, and that I think we should just play it safe. He steamrolls my objections and insists everything will be fine, and I'm worrying for nothing. I tell him I'm not comfortable with it, and he just repeats himself. Red flag. Apparently, I have no choice in the matter, so we leave and head to the bars, joint A burnin'. We arrive safely. Bob parks in a very obvious pay-to-park lot. These lots are heavily patrolled by tow companies, but are usually only staffed by an automatic kiosk machine where you can pay. However, since it was a holiday weekend, there was an actual person attendant as well. Bob parks, and we begin to walk toward the bar, making no move toward the machine to pay. I warn him this lot is heavily towed, but he once again steamrolls over my warning and tells me it'll be fine. FYI, I knew this would not be fine. He would 100% get towed if he didn't pay before we went inside. The parking attendant comes jogging over to us, trying to get our attention, as I try unsuccessfully to convince him paying is not optional. But he never stops walking. Finally, the attendant neared us enough to say in our direction, "Hey man, you gotta pay to park or you'll get towed." Without an ounce of humor in his voice, cold, chilling, and completely unlike anything I'd heard come out of his mouth all night, he replied just loudly enough to be heard by the man. "If I get towed, I'll fucking stab you." What the actual fuck? My legs almost give out in shock. My brain clicks that I may be in danger. The parking attendant mutters something about towing and walks off. I decided right then and there that he is definitely not my ride anymore. All bets are off because he just threatened to stab the parking attendant. I needed to ditch him. Somehow. Safely. I take a step away, putting distance between us, but keep pace with him as we walk toward a bar. I ask, "What the fuck was that?" "You know you're definitely getting towed now that you threatened that guy." "B, I was just joking." "M, you didn't say it like a joke." And he definitely didn't laugh. "B, it wasn't serious." I let him know that I didn't like his behavior. Now in an increasingly crowded area, the witnesses made me bolder. I developed a plan in my head, hoping I could discreetly phone a cab from the lady's room and run for it, using the crowd as cover. He knew where I lived, no fixing that, but hopefully his car being towed would slow him down a bit. Bob continued to insist it had all been one big, hilarious joke as we entered bar number 1, that I'd misunderstood, that I couldn't take a joke. I knew better. His voice had been deadly serious and ice cold. My instincts told me he had been serious about his threat. I continued planning my escape in my head while he testified his innocence. I'd need to bide my time till the right moment, so I waited, uncomfortably and suddenly aware of how he'd been acting erratically all night, and I was just now noticing. I feel my gut twist inside me. I was scared now, and I felt like an idiot for brushing off the other warning signs. He clearly wasn't balanced. But if he'd wanted to kill me, you'd think he'd already have done it, right? In the safety of my one-bedroom apt, right? I hung my hopes on this thought. We enter bar number 1. It's obvious I'm miffed by the encounter in the parking lot. He never did pay, and Bob seems annoyed by this. Bob puts a card down on the bar and starts a tab. We order drinks. I take mine directly from the bartender and watch it like it's my fucking job. Bob fiddling with his phone when suddenly he grunts in annoyance. Its battery has died. MBD, right? No. He proceeds to tell me that he was in the middle of transferring money between his accounts when his phone died, that he was putting money on the card that the bartender was holding for our tab, but since his battery died before he was finished, there is no money on that card. I immediately offered to pay for the drinks. He could take back his card. I'd pay cash, NBD. Already I just wanted the night to be over. B, there's an ATM in bar number 2 right across the street. I can get cash there. I don't want you to pay. We can go to bar number 2 really quickly. We don't even have to close out this tab. We will just come right back and pay it. I have been inside bar number 2 many times. I am way more comfortable there than in bar number 1. I'm even friends with one of the barbacks, so I'm hoping perhaps he can help me escape my nightmare date as gracefully as possible with minimal risk. I send up a silent prayer he's working tonight and agree wholeheartedly to just dip right on out of their tab unpaid, debit card left behind. He's coming right back to pay anyways, right? We go to bar number 2. The ladies' room is right next to the ATM, and as he's using it, I never actually saw if he successfully got cash or not. I excuse myself and slip into the ladies' room. I must be the luckiest chick in the world because my friend Heather, bless her soul, came stumbling out of a stall behind me as I was staring hopelessly into the mirror above the sinks, silently cursing my own stupidity and wishing I anywhere else but in my current predicament. I was saved. Relief washed over me in a wave, and I ran into her arms and hugged her violently, telling her all about my weird date, how he'd been erratic all night and threatened to stab the parking attendant not 30 minutes ago in this creepy voice. And most importantly, how I didn't want him to drive me home anymore, how I just wanted to get away but needed a ride. Heather turned out to be out with her husband and his friends, some of I knew. We made a plan. She'd walk with me to their table, and I'd sit with them. They'd keep an eye on me as I explained to Bob that I wasn't feeling a connection and wanted to finish the rest of the night out with my friends. They'd keep me safe and drive me home later. We planned the whole speech, but I never had to use it. I walked out the bathroom door, and he was gone. I didn't see him again that night, nor did he text me. Heather filled everybody in, and the guys were real sweet about it, putting me in the center seat, so I was obscured from view mostly by passerbys. A sick feeling in my gut tells me he stuck around and watched me join the boys at Heather's table and maybe even sit extra low in my chair. My friends took me all the way to my door that night after the bars, making sure I was safely inside. Abandoned on my coffee table was the glass bong, brand new grinder, and lighter Bob had insisted upon buying, paid probably $60 for, then took maybe 3 hits off. The worst part was when I walked into my bathroom after kicking off my heels, having just got home. I noticed a small glass thing on the side of my bathtub, which I noticed as I sat on the toilet to pee. I picked it up. It was about the size of a tube of lip balm, but fatter and rounder. When I inspected it closely, I found a thimble full of loose white powder on the inside. It seemed to be contained to one side, while the other half was empty and had a hole on top. I examined it closely. I was pretty sure it was Coke, but I'd never seen anything like that little glass contraption before. Realizing Bob had used my bathroom and it had to be his, I freaked out thinking that he'd surely come back for his drugs if he left them behind on accident. He never did though, and I tucked away the glass powder-filled thing out of paranoia deep in my closet, afraid if he did return for it, I'd better have it. After a month, I tossed it. The whole thing baffled me. If he was short on money, why'd he insist on making a special trip to buy something not really needed? Had he ever returned to pay the tab? Did he leave me stranded because I was obviously turned off by his threat? Did he get embarrassed and just leave? He certainly didn't seem like the type, but clearly I made a misjudgment about him somewhere. Was he just impossibly and coked out dude? Like, what the hell was that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because it's baffled me for years. Bob went radio silent for a month, then texted hey 3 times in 1 week. I didn't respond. The next week he showed up at my work, requesting my section again. I was shocked to see him, and he'd spotted me already, so I decided to speak to him at least, but give the table away to another server. He acted as if nothing ever happened. Asked me why I didn't respond to his texts. I told him I was busy. He said he'd like to hang out again. I said I didn't think so. He asked why not. Me, you left me at bar number 2. B, that's not exactly what happened. Me, well, regardless, you were my ride. You knew that. You didn't try texting or calling me, and you've got my number. You were gone when I came out of the bathroom, but luckily I found some friends, so it didn't matter. I walked away at that point and let someone else get him his cobbler. He didn't try to contradict my statement that he'd left me stranded at the bar, at the very least, nor did he mention the cocaine he'd left in my bathroom. Bob continued to text me occasionally for the next 3 years. Every 3 to 6 months or so, a one-word TXT came through. Hey, testing the waters. I never answered. I keep his number saved in my phone so I don't accidentally answer a text to this very day, just in case, should he ever try again. Story 3. So this just happened today. Against my better judgment at the beginning of the month, I got a Tinder. I matched with a few guys, etc. One of them is James. We ended up texting each other, and he seemed pretty chill, and pretty into me. He's a decent-looking guy, and we seemed to click. He had apparently been in a relatively abusive relationship with a woman, and he was looking to start over. According to him, she had hit him with a frying pan and pepper sprayed him once. He kept going on about how crazy she was. Alright, it happens. We went out to the movies this past Friday, and I had a great time. We ended up talking for a few hours, and we hit it off pretty well. I asked about the ex because I was a bit curious as to why he'd stay with someone like that. He didn't say anything positive about her, just that she was crazy, had mental illnesses and didn't take her meds, that kind of stuff. She had tried to baby trap him, but she had a miscarriage. He expressed relief that she didn't end up with the kid. He said he had felt obligated to her. Again, I get that. In all, I had a good time. This morning rolls around, and he tells me that he had hooked up with his ex last night, and that he was going to try and work things out with her. Mildly insulting that I lost out to an abusive chick, but whatever. I tell him it's cool. He then a few hours later texted me to say that she was crazy, and he thought she was changing, but she wasn't, blah blah. He kept asking if he could see me. He was being very pushy about wanting to see me today. He begged for 5 minutes of my time, so he could explain to me. I politely told him that I didn't want to be involved with someone who was so clearly hung up on his ex. This is where it got nuts. He admitted he still was, but that he wanted to see me today so I could meet her and she could determine if I was better for him than she was, and that she wanted him to be happy because he and I had a connection. I flipped after that, told him that the fact he needed his ex to determine who was right for him was absolutely nuts, and that is not what love is, and that I wanted no part of it. His ex started texting me after that, and it was non-stop insults and incoherent shit that made no sense. She also dropped the bomb that she was his wife. I told her to fuck off basically, and blocked the number. I went on Tinder to message him, where I called him a piece of shit, and if he was intelligent, he should leave her and never message me again. He started to harass me saying that I was miserable because they have a beautiful love together and all this crazy shit. He then went on to say, "My wife knows where you work. I hope she doesn't do anything rash." And I told him if that was a threat, I would gladly go to the police. He then said that she's been to jail before, she's not afraid, and that she loves him so much she'd fuck anyone up and risk jail for him. That she'd kill my friends if they tried to protect me. That she's armed and dangerous. I told him goodbye, reported him, and deleted my Tinder account. I did go to the police tonight, but since it wasn't a direct threat, they can't do much. The cop thinks that James was more or less full of shit, and just trying to scare me, since some people love getting off on that shit. He said I did the right thing by blocking him and reporting him, and said I should just keep my eyes open, and alert the people at my job. Scary thing is, James seemed perfectly normal. But he lied about being married, how he felt towards his wife, and he flipped like a switch. His excuse for not being upfront about being married was that they were going to get a divorce. He seemed so docile and unassuming, and the hatred and aggressive attitude was insane. I have to honestly wonder what would have happened had I gone to talk for 5 minutes. I'm kinda concerned since they do know where I work, but if either of them try anything then the cops can actually nail them. What a weekend. Story 4. A little while back, I decided I needed to get back out there and start trying to meet people. Not necessarily actively looking for a relationship, but meeting people at the bars just wasn't working for me. So as most single college girls, I downloaded a dating app. I met a lot of people and talked to them online, and it gave me the confidence to try to actually go out on a date every now and then. I didn't meet up with many of these guys in person, but there were a few. Most didn't lead to a second date, but there was one that was worse than the rest. I met this guy Alex, and we made plans to go out to dinner. He said he wanted to take me to this nice restaurant in the town between us, but when the day came, he never answered his phone. The next day he contacts me with a story about getting stuck at work and forgetting his phone at home. Whatever excuses, I wasn't really buying it, but he asked to reschedule. Stupidly enough, I said yes. So the day comes, and he tells me to meet him at his house, and he will drive us to this restaurant that he made reservations at. He said to come hungry like 3 times, and kept reminding me not to eat beforehand. I guess this place is big plates. Now, I don't really like meeting people for the first time at their home or getting into their car, but we had been talking for over a week, so I figured, what the hell. But when I got close, and he calls and tells me to park in the parking lot down the road. Weird, but okay. Small driveway, I guess. Trouble is, I never told him what kind of car I drove, but he pulled into the parking lot right behind me and texted saying he was parked 2 spots down. Red flag 1. So I get in his car, against my better judgment, and we start heading for the restaurant. Now, I didn't know where we were exactly. I'm not really familiar with the town, but I know the restaurant we were heading to, and it shouldn't have been more than like 10 minutes away on a major highway. But almost 25 minutes later, we're driving down some dark back road. So I looked at him and said, "Hey, where the hell are we going anyway?" He proceeded to tell me that he hadn't told me the full story. Apparently, when he called to make reservations, it took 3 times of calling before they actually answered. And when someone finally did answer, they told him they had moved locations and given him a description of where they were now located, like the intersection. My stomach dropped when I realized we had passed that intersection probably 5 minutes before this point, and I realized that he didn't have an address punched into his GPS, even though the GPS was running. Red flag 2. So, I pulled up my GPS, punched in the name of the restaurant, and it said the business was closed for the day. Red flag 3. At this point, yes, I know I was being stupid, but I stayed, and we hung out and talked, got to know each other. Still, the way he went about things was kind of a creepy. When he couldn't find the restaurant, he just kind of said, "Don't worry, I know a place we can go," and drove farther into the darkness, eventually pulling over to a trail in the woods, and told me we had to walk the rest of the way. He said we were going stargazing. The spot was beautiful and all, but the whole way through the woods to the clearing, he just kept cracking jokes about how he swore he wasn't a serial killer or something, and telling me to promise I wasn't going to steal his keys and take the car and leave him there. Red flag 4. I'm not sure how to explain this, but through half the night, he just kept lying to me. He would tell me these big, elaborate, detailed stories and then suddenly end with, "Just kidding, that never happened. It was funny the first time, when he tried to convince me he got so drunk one night in college that he got his penis pierced. But after 2 hours of this shit, I realized he had been just kidding about almost everything he had said. I realized I didn't even really know any true thing about this guy. Red flag 5. Yes, I know I'm an idiot. We were talking about going to watch a movie at his house. He was all for it, and then apparently changed his mind and pulled the car over in front of a park suddenly on the way back. He said he'd rather stay there. He kept trying to dare me to run naked through the park and asking me weirdly sexual, personal questions, like about specific experiences, not even general thoughts or preferences. Suddenly he demanded to know if I was going to kiss him or not before the night was over, and said he wanted to put on chapstick first. This guy literally made me dig through my purse looking for chapstick while he sat in the driver's seat, making a big show of licking his lips and trying to subtly rub his dick through his pants. But I saw. I told him I didn't have any chapstick, so he said that was fine, but why don't you crawl on over here and show me what you got? Cue patting his lap. I told him I didn't think I was comfortable with that, and he then proceeded to reach around me and try to drag me into his lap, using my butt as leverage. I told him again that I had no intention of sleeping with him or anyone on a first date, and he again said that was fine, but how about a little 2-minute preview? Cue dragging my hand into his lap. Final red flag. Sirens are going off in my head. I got mad at this point. This was after he had spent days telling me how much he hates men who try to force themselves upon women, and how he doesn't understand how anyone could do that, let alone get pleasure from it. This after he said he didn't want to sit too close to me while we were stargazing, so he didn't make me uncomfortable. It was like a switch had flipped. I told him that trying to force me wasn't going to make me any more likely to agree, and that I thought he was supposed to be a gentleman, like he'd been telling me all night he was. He told me that he thought I was just scared of how big it was, and that if I didn't want to suck it there were other options. Again tries to grab my hand. I told him again that it wasn't going to happen, and he pouted about it. I was racking my brain trying to think of an excuse to get him to drive me back to my car when he pulled out his phone, opened a text message thread. He wasn't hiding it. I could see that the last 3 messages were ones sent by him, and then looks at me and says that he got a text from his uncle that he lived with, saying that something had happened at the house, and he needed to get home ASAP. I'm done at this point, regardless, but I hate being lied to. If you weren't having a good time, you could have just asked to call it a night. Why lie? Why make up false intentions, and then deliberately act the exact opposite way of what you said? Just why? To make things worse, he dropped me off at my car, in a dark parking lot, at midnight, and then just drove off before I had even walked to my car. Obviously, there wasn't going to be a second date. But the kicker, I drove by the old location of the restaurant a few days ago. It never moved. It's still open and right on the highway. And his house is about 2 minutes down the road. Where the hell was he taking me? Story 5. So to start, I'm a transgender woman. I'm single and I make my status as trans very clear on all my dating profiles, except Plenty of Fish because they consider that to be talking about sex, and they will straight up ban you. So I state instead that I'm a huge proponent of trans rights. So this guy messages me. He lives about an hour away. Kinda cute in a mildly creepy way, like something seems a little off about him, but people can't help how they look, so I give him a chance just like I would want. I discover he's a smoker, but he says he's trying hard to quit and only does when he's really stressed or upset. We have a nice conversation and finally he asks for my number, and without thinking about it, I give him the number but tell him I'm getting ready for my evening classes, so I'll be slow to respond. A few minutes go by and I get, "Hi, it's username from POF." Now usually I send standard quick message. "Hi, it's Allie, so just to be clear since my profile might be a little vague, I'm a transgender woman. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, so if you're not interested I completely understand." About 20% of the time the guy isn't interested and gets rude and needs to be blocked, and the other 80% is split between immediate inappropriate questions and dick pics, casual acceptance, or dead silence. But like I said, I was getting ready to go to class, so I hadn't sent the message yet. A few minutes go by, and I'm about to text him my standard when I get another text. "Who the fuck is full dead name? Why is he paying your cell phone bill?" "Me. Where did you even get that name?" "Him. Answer the question, who is he?" I'm honestly stunned at this point, and I realize he must have paid one of those shady websites that offer personal info for a fee. Well, if you must know, I'm transgender, and that used to be my name. I was about to tell you when you pulled that stunt. Please do us both a favor and lose my number. That's incredibly invasive, and I don't want to talk to you anymore. Do you still live at my address at the time in hometown? I'm coming to see you so we can talk about this in person. Me lying. No, I moved a few months ago, and I'm getting ready to head out like I said. You need to leave me alone. Don't contact me again. Him. Since you have something to hide, I'm going to run a full background check on you. You lied to me, and I don't appreciate that. Me. I'm sending screen caps of this conversation, your POF profile, and your photos to my two best friends who work in law enforcement in your town, and my ex-boyfriend, who I'm still on good terms with, who works for the local sheriff's office. Don't text me again. I didn't hear anything else from him for a few weeks. I made sure my doors and windows were locked, and the aforementioned friends and ex would check up on me from time to time. Eventually it just became one of those weird things that makes you laugh uneasily. And then one day I thought I saw him at the local grocery store. Same dark hair, thick glasses frames, and just creepy guy staring at me, watching me as I shopped. I texted my ex about it, and as an upswing on things, my ex and I got back together in a casual sort of way, and he stayed the night a few times a month off and on. One night when I was alone though, I just kept getting this weird feeling and smelling smoke. I lived in a little apartment complex that were 3 separate apartments that shared walls, but no plumbing or air ducts. I don't smoke, and I'm very sensitive to the smell thanks to asthma. The apartment had a wall unit AC, so I turned it off since it was apparently pulling air in from a neighbor's guest who must have been chain smoking, I thought. I had an ASL video due the next morning, so I was up all night practicing and recording the video, signing the same story over and over again until it was almost a dance rather than narration. A couple of times I had to restart the video because my cat was going nuts. Finally around 7 a.m. I had the video finished and sent in, and was ready for bed, so I double-checked all the doors and windows were locked, set an alarm, and went to sleep. I woke up and got ready for school, was running a bit late, and had to hurry out the door, but I noticed something weird but didn't have time to stop and register it. Classes went smoothly. I got an A on my ASL video, and I stopped for groceries on my way home from class. As I got home, I saw what had been bugging me. Each apartment had a small garden on each side of the porch. Mine was nothing but gravel and pavers the previous tenant had put in, but it was tidy, except for a pile of cigarette butts that looked like someone had dumped their car ashtray in my garden. There was no other trash, just that pile, right in front of my bedroom window. I don't think anything about it at first, and just get a broom and dustpan and sweep it up. As I'm doing it, my neighbor, an old man, comes out and asks if my boyfriend ever got a hold of me. I ask him what he means. He tells me there was a young man waiting for me on my front porch off and on for a few hours last night, that he'd seen the guy around before and thought he was my boyfriend. I ask what he looked like. Dark hair, thick glasses, chain smoking. I text the on-again, off-again ex. Cops take statements and I give them the screenshots. I moved out of state a few weeks later for unrelated reasons and have legally changed my name since, with closed records. I don't give guys my number anymore. Ladies and my fellow queer family, use a texting app until you get to know someone, because for like $5 creeps can get everything from your number. Story 6. When I was 20 years old, so 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, albeit temporarily, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punch it in on my GPS, and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrive and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and mostly littered with modern townhouses, but the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something's about to go down, but thankfully a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s. He was pretty tall, maybe a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny. I tell him his pizza is here, and he just stands there staring at me. I asked him if he was okay, and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago, and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money, I hand him the pizza, and as I'm making change he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that?" Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said good night, and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later I get a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door very excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well." As he was pulling out his wallet, as he's counting his money, he asks me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point, and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my name. As I'm making change, he asks if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than I was at the time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently, and wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay. I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night and walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway staring at me until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy, and even brought it up to my co-workers, and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the shift. Fucking asshole. A week later, as I'm working the night shift, and we get an order from the same guy again, and this is when shit finally hits the fan. I arrive at the house at around 10:30 p.m., and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I get out of my car, and I walk to the front door with the pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit, and I jumped back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door now so that you wouldn't have to ring the bell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in the house, so was he sitting in the dark this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laugh and say it's okay. He asked me if I liked his suit, to which I said yes. He then asks me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the fuck? I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms hard. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, "Dude, please. I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care. Get inside now. We're gonna have a good time." He starts trying to pull me into the house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presumed was a knife. I did something that to this day I am still thankful worked as he was doing that. I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach. This stuns him for a few seconds, and he loosened his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and even yells, "Why are you making this so difficult?" I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it, and luckily it hits his head, and he lets me go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging on my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of the spot, and quickly reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my head screaming, "Stop the fucking car." I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panicked state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and I slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, the first pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that had just happened. My coworker comforted me, and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrive at the store and I give them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself, as well as scratches on my car from the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home, and I collapsed on my bed, and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day, and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as the psycho goes, 2 days later I receive an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother, who lived on the right side with his wife, and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly, at first for robberies and assaults, but later on, it was for sex crimes. He had been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having sex with a minor. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone and his family had no idea where he ran off to. But the police insisted they would find him. And indeed they did, albeit not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind. But the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently, he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street. Luckily, somebody happened to be looking out the window at the right time, called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee, and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard, and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thanked the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I walk down the street, and I light up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything I had just been told. I don't wish death on people, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I would never have to encounter him ever again, and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. My last experience 2 years before this was scary, but I think this one takes the cake as being the scariest, as I was alone and face to face with this psycho. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house. Story 7. I had been sent to Korea from my university a few years ago. They told me for my major I had to go somewhere in Asia, and my friend had really talked up Korea for me. I knew nothing about it, but I decided what the hell, and I embarked on a semester-long trip. I had only had one serious boyfriend in my life, who I had broken up with a few months prior. I also don't enjoy one-night stands, and wasn't digging the dudes at the clubs in Seoul. But I still wanted to have some sort of romantic experience, I suppose, so my friend recommended I use this dating app to meet English-speaking Koreans. That way I could meet someone and experience the actual dating culture. I thought, I'm young, so why not? I was just so eager to have new experiences. Maybe it sounds dumb to try dating in a foreign country, but it worked out for me eventually. Not the first date. I met him on a dating app after being in Seoul about 3 weeks. Let's call him Tim. I still didn't know the culture or city very well, and was a bit naive about everything. He eagerly wanted to meet for a date after talking to me, and he seemed nice. I should have asked more questions, and I should have noticed that he was not giving me many details about himself. Tim was a guy a bit older than me, but claimed he was a college student. I assumed he had done his military time, all men in Korea have to, and returned to school. We talked for a bit, and decided to meet for a tea date near the school I went to. He wanted to come to my dorm originally to pick me up, but I live in an all-women's dorm, and I didn't want him to know exactly where I lived since we were still strangers. So instead I insisted we meet at the main town center, near the subway. He really didn't like this idea, which looking back was a red flag. But eventually I insisted. The night of the date, I waited an hour for this guy. He was very late. Tim weirdly claimed he just wanted to make me wait. I thought he was kidding and messaged him a laughing emoji, assuming he was just lost. When he finally arrived, he was much smaller than I thought, but a man's height has never been something I care about much. He was also quite thin. Maybe I let my guard down because I didn't see him as physically threatening to me, which was a mistake in the end. Right off the bat, he was way too touchy with me, and breathed creepy and heavy. I was so off-put with his demeanor. I'm usually very tolerant with different personality types, but this was very odd to me. I had been told that Korean men would be polite and not so touchy on the first date. He was also dressed oddly like in business attire for a date, but I thought that maybe it's just a Korean thing. Again, I was dumb and knew jack shit about the culture. Then, the first thing he said to me was, "You're not as white as I thought you were." I thought this was a translation error, but his English was near perfect. So I asked for clarification, and he said what he meant. "I thought you would be more white. Your skin is darker than I thought, and your eyes aren't as green. Are you pure European?" Now I was officially weirded out. First of all, I'm pretty much as white as you can get. I'm Irish and Scandinavian, so white as hell basically. So the fact he thought I could have possibly been any whiter was funny. And why did he care in the first place anyway? Why does my skin color matter to this guy? And why is he bringing it up? He said about 3 times on the date how he wished I had greener eyes. And every time I would just reply, "Well, maybe my online photos make me look brighter," and brushed it off as him being nervous and trying to start a conversation. Isn't it funny the dumb excuses you make for people when you're panicked? When we arrived at the tea place, I tried to order a basic raspberry tea, and he stopped me and told me I had to have this special tea. I thought it was weird he wanted to choose my tea for me, but in my head I brushed it off once again. He really insisted I drink only this tea type, and I just agreed. These small details become weirder later. After tea he asked if we could look around my school. It was dark, but the school is very well lit, so I agreed. And the whole time we walked around, he would randomly stop and grab me for long hugs. At first I let it happen, but then I stopped him. And he just kept trying. He kept grabbing me and breathing hard into my neck. It was so awkward. He also would not tell me any personal details about himself. I asked so many questions, desperately trying to distract from all the awkward grabbing and to try and get to know him. But he would never tell me anything. He even said at one point, "I'm a mysterious man," like a movie line. He also said something like, "You look so much like my favorite movie character," and I asked who. But he said that I would have to figure it out on my own. Finally he said, "I want to go to a dark area." And in my head I screamed hell no. At this point I wanted the date over fast. He somehow knew there was a wooded area behind my campus, and he said we should go there. I said no, and that I wanted to stay near the main campus in town. But he kept pushing. Finally he grabbed my arm and started dragging me there. He said, "I can't let anyone see," and I started to panic. I finally ripped my arm away and just demanded we leave and go back to the main road immediately. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't ask for help or get angry. Maybe I was scared. But I just began to book it back to the main road, and he followed. We ended up in front of a hospital near the center of town, and I told him it was time for him to go. I made some excuse, and he was pleading with me to stay. I told him we could meet the next day. I lied, and I would message him. I just wanted to get away at this point. I was pretending it was all okay, just so he would leave. Suddenly, I think he's leaning in to kiss me, and I immediately think, oh God, I know. But it was so much worse. Instead, I feel pain in my face. It takes me a second to realize he was biting my face. It was like a dog. I had never felt the sensation before. He leaned his head sideways and bit me on my nose and cheek as hard as he could. I screamed and pushed him away from me. His face looked so freaky, and I barely had time to react in words. Instead, I ran up the sidewalk until I saw a convenience store on the right. I ran to the back of the store and bent down to start crying. The man who owned the store started to yell at me, but I couldn't explain my situation. I just begged him in English to let me stay. I ended up having to buy a popsicle to stick around. God, I wish I had learned some Korean by then. I guess Tim didn't follow me. I peered outside the store and didn't see him. I texted a friend and waited for them to get me to take me back to my dorm. On the way, I messaged Tim and basically told him to stay away from me. I told him he was a creep, that he shouldn't bite women, and something along the lines of me calling the police. And then I blocked him. I was so scared to walk around my school area after that. I was so afraid he would find me somehow. I am so thankful I never let him pick me up at my dorm. I called my mom to tell her what happened when suddenly she said, "Wait, what did he ask you?" She then put some details together and realized that all of these weird things had to do with the 50 Shades of Grey books. At first I thought she was just being silly and overthinking a bad date. I thought she was joking, but oh God, she was right. She had recently seen the movie or read the book of something and knew the details. The eye color and way he dressed, and the tea he made me drink and the random lines he said. It all matches the books and movies. For his dirty little fantasy. My mom thinks he picked me because I look like the girl in that movie to him. It explains why he was so fixated on my appearance. And his whole thing with the biting and trying to dominate me. Even if it wasn't his intention, I later learned that there are some few creeps who seek out foreign girls to dominate and have sex with as like a prize. They call it riding the white horse or something along those lines. On a happier note, this bad experience didn't stop me. I eventually met someone else in Korea, and we ended up falling in love. We even did the whole long distance thing, and now I'm living in Korea studying and working, hoping to marry soon. So I guess I didn't let bad, creepy guys stop my life. Story 8. I was 21, recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped. So my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the I'm invincible and I can take on anyone mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted, and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came, I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then, the van started driving towards us, and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car, and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car, and walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on, and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property, and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car, and I moved it to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied. Obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and saying they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number. I had 2 at gunpoint, and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man, who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid fucking rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale, looked horrified. I went to the back of the van, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen, and the van was a reported stolen. Story 8. I was 21, recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped. So my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the I'm invincible and I can take on anyone mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted, and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came, I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then, the van started driving towards us, and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car, and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car, and walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on, and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property, and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car, and I moved it to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied. Obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and saying they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint, and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man, who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid fucking rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale, looked horrified. I went to the back of the van, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen, and the van was a reported stolen. Story 9. This happened 3 summers ago, but I remember the main events. To preface this, I have been on a shocking amount of dates and put myself in many foolish situations in the past. I am a female, and I was 25 at the time if it matters. It started on the POF app. I came across a cute guy. He was my type physically, kind of nerdy looking. On his profile, he had very adventurous photos of him hiking and traveling. He seemed really exciting to get to know. Once he saw I looked at his profile, he sent me a message. We flirted a bit back and forth and exchanged numbers, even though he lived about an hour away. He said on the app he's never been to my city and didn't plan on it, so we probably wouldn't meet. I respected his honesty. I don't like wasting my time. One day shortly after meeting him, online he texted me randomly saying he's in my town on some work thing and invited me to a bar he was at. I decided to meet up since I was already in the area. He said he would pick me up. I was dumb and agreed, even though it was just over 4 blocks away. It took him way longer than it should have to get to me, and I honestly don't think he was actually ever at the bar. Once in POF Date's car, I noticed it was a rental, and that it seemed like he had just gotten his license because he was a terrible driver. After driving in circles, he told me to pick a place, but not in the area, because parking is impossible. I picked a place 15 minutes away by car with lots of parking, but also a busy place since I was with a stranger. Once there, he started pressuring me to drink. He insisted. I'm not a huge drinker, but I enjoy pub-style bars. I caved and had a drink, and was again pressured to have another one. He was very pushy and seemed really irritated that I wasn't going for it. Usually I'd end a date pretty quickly if being mistreated, but he became charming enough to keep me there at least until we were done our date. I saw an old acquaintance at the bar and wanted my date to know I knew him. In my head, I think I wanted my date to know that someone could identify him. I'm not a paranoid person, but I think my subconscious was on alert. After an hour talking in the bar, I tell him I'm ready to head out. He insisted we go across the road to get coffee. At the time, it seemed strange to me. Neither of us had much to drink and didn't need to sober up. Coffee seems like an odd choice otherwise. I entertained it. Once there, we sipped our drinks. He told me he rented a beautiful Airbnb in a nearby neighborhood that is more out of the city/country. He told me he had it all to himself and invited me going on about how nice it is. I kept politely saying no and throwing around different excuses, which he would counter with a reason for me to come. With no intention of going, I agreed, but only if he would drive me home to get overnight things. I felt he wasn't going to let me say no. He seemed happy with that answer, so we headed out. While driving in the direction of my place, he said instead he would stop at a 7-Eleven and grab me travel-sized toiletries, so I wouldn't need anything. I felt panicked because my plan was not to go with him. Something about him was off, and I felt stupid for even getting back in his car to begin with. He turned his car, and we were then headed toward the more country area. Literally, there aren't any 7/11s or open stores in the middle of nowhere. Then I mentioned that I'm actually thinking I'd prefer not to stay with him and asked to be brought home. He then said something that made me completely nervous to be around him for much longer. He said he's sharing the Airbnb with the owners and said they are really fun and sweet and that they drink and play games together. He originally said he had it all to himself. I knew I didn't want to make it obvious that I was catching on to his lie, so I went along with it and said, "Oh, I have to wear my cute fluffy overnight PJs instead of my date dress because I'll be way more comfy." Then I spewed off a few other things. I mentioned that I need my medication and absolutely can't miss a dose. Surprisingly, he turned around, and as we drove back into the city, I felt a bit more calm, but at that point, not safe. Finally, we got close to my place. I had no intention of letting him close enough to know where I live. He was mentioning that he was going to come up to my apartment once we got there, and that is just a huge hell no. I don't know what I would do, but I looked for any opportunity to get out of the situation knowing he could turn around and take me somewhere private in the matter of 15 minutes if he wanted. We got to a stop sign where people were crossing, thank God. I quickly but calmly got out and said, I think I have a headache. I'll text you." I closed the car door and went through a public park which was beside a building that his car wouldn't be able to drive into. I looked back to make sure he wasn't getting out of his car/following, and I could see him staring at me. He was so furious I have chills thinking about it. Within the hour, he had blocked me on POF. Looking back, I think he possibly wanted to get me a coffee to possibly put something in it. I think he told me on POF that we would never meet to maybe cover his ass. And I know he did not have good intentions with me. Since then I have met my fiancée on POF, and was super careful about dating up until then, making sure the first few dates are very public and to arrange my own transportation. Story 10. A bunch of years ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder. I was a freshman in college and just got out of a relationship and having fun. I matched with this guy, M24, we can call him D. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and went to the same school, so I thought, why not? The red flags started rolling in immediately when I said I would go on a date with him. Of course, the fact that he was much older isn't lost on me as the initial red flag. At this time, I didn't have a car. D offers to pick me up, but tells me that he is not in town, but he would leave his grandmother's funeral early, which was at a minimum 5 hours away, to come and pick me up. He showed up in sweatpants, a wife beater, and flip-flops, which struck me as odd because he said he was coming from a funeral. We hadn't made plans, just to get a bite to eat and hang out. Since he had been out of town, he asked if it was okay, if we stopped to pick up his dog. He had left the dog with a friend. I like dogs, so I was like, no problem. It's dark and we pull up to an apartment complex, and he leaves me in the car and come back with a golden retriever. The dog immediately starts growling at me, which had never happened to me before, so I start feeling a little weird. Dee doesn't say anything about the dog's temperament. Because we have the dog, he wants to drop him off at his house. This feels logical to me, so I agree. When we pull up to Dee's house, he asks if I want to come in. Not wanting to sit in the car, I do. The moment I walked in, I immediately knew it was the wrong choice. The house is trashed. There is garbage everywhere. Trash bags full along the front entry, bottles and wrappers on the couch, and just general crap everywhere. Dee lets me know he has a roommate, but that roommate isn't home. I assume this is to imply the mess isn't his. After brushing the trash off the couch, he asks if I want to sit and play chess. I had expressed that I was interested in learning, and he seemed more than happy to help me learn. This too was a mistake. Dee begins explaining the game to me, and it isn't fun first date explaining. He has gotten very serious, and is showing me each piece while telling me what it is, what it does, and how it moves. Dee then begins questioning me over each piece, which most I get wrong. Every time I get one wrong, he yells at me the correct answer, and tells me try again. He got more and more frustrated, and it made me very uncomfortable, so I suggested we pause chess and do something else. Dee suggests watching a movie, which is fine with me. The idea of us leaving and going to get food seemingly forgotten. Dee tells me that we can watch movie in his room, and I oblige, but then he explains that he has to put clean sheets on the bed. I had assumed we were moving to his bedroom because it may have been cleaner, but when we go in it's not, and there is no TV in his room. He proceeds to put Iron Man 2 onto his phone to have us watch. We watched about 10 minutes of it before things got sexual. I won't tell you strangers the details, but short story short, we didn't have sex, but other things went down. I will say those things were consensual. After they occurred, I was feel really odd about the whole situation, and told him I didn't want to have sex. Dee was confused, but didn't push it at first. He said fine, and we watched maybe 5 more minutes of the movie before he said he didn't want to watch the movie and more. He started complaining and asking me why I didn't want to have sex with him, and I simply said I wasn't in the mood anymore. He then began pressuring me to tell him exactly what it was about him that made me feel that way. At this point, we had moved from the bedroom back into the dirty living room. You might be thinking, seems like a perfect time to leave. And I thought so too, but this is where things start to get scary. As if he knows I'm thinking about how I'm leaving, he explodes and begins to scream at me. This is a 6-foot-something man screaming in the face of a 5-foot-nothing young girl. Of course I'm internally freaking out, but I'm trying to make sure I don't piss him off anymore, but also not agreeing to anything. For the next 5 to 10 minutes, Dee screams at me about why I don't like him, why I don't want him, and continuously asks what's wrong with him and to tell him. I tried to placate him as best as possible, saying the old, it's not you, it's me, and no, I don't want to leave. Again, this man is my only ride home, and I'm truthfully not sure exactly where I was. Though I did have my phone and Google Maps, I did not have Uber at the time. Dee finally calms down when he believes I'm going to stay, then suggests we try playing some video game. I was in full internal freak-out mode, trying to make sure I was playing the part of the interested date, because I was terrified that if he felt I wanted to leave, he would freak out again. We play this game for a while, then out of nowhere, Dee starts getting upset again. He started yelling about why no one likes him, why no one wants to get to know him, and why no one loves him, saying that he has never had a girlfriend, and all his dates have been one-night stands. Again, I placate him with I don't know. Lots of girls are just snooty like that. At this point, I'm saying anything and everything he wants to hear. He even starts crying about how his mother never loved him, and telling me very deep, dark things about what his mother has said to him and treated him. After he finally calms down once more, he gets up and goes to the kitchen to fix us some drinks. Now, if you're anyone with a brain, you're thinking absolutely not, which was my exact thought at that moment. I decline his multiple offers for a drink. He asks if instead of alcohol, I wanted water, and of course I declined that too, feigning that I wasn't thirsty. I stayed at his apartment until about 1 a.m., because I was sitting next to him terrified to ask him to take me home 2, say I'd walk home 3, figure out how to get an Uber. I had been trying to download Uber on my phone without him noticing, but then it asks for card information, and that was too hard to do without him noticing. So around 1 a.m. I yawn very loud and say, "Oh wow, it's 1 a.m. My roommate's going to be so worried about me." I laugh as if my roommate would be stupid to worry, and that I hadn't been watching the clock since he picked me up at 9 p.m. and then said, "I'm so tired. I should get home soon." Again, I was super scared he would freak out, but he didn't explode. He just looked at the clock and said, yeah, it was late, but I was not taking any chances, so I said, "I have a great idea. If I get to bed, soon I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus." I was hoping my offer convinced him that I was intending to see him again, and it did. He seemed very happy at the prospect of it and jumped up, walking me out of my house and to his car. The drive back was excruciatingly long. The ride was completely silent. Neither of us spoke. It was only a 10-minute drive, but I could have sworn he slowed down every time we got to a particularly dark area or underpass. Dee dropped me off, and I smiled and made a good show of being tired, yet excited to see him tomorrow. He offered multiple times to walk me to my door, but I declined every time and said I didn't want to bother him and I'd see him tomorrow. I walked myself to the building, and the moment I got around the corner, I sprinted so fast up the stairs and to my door before he could change his mind and follow me to my door. When I got in my dorm room, I genuinely felt like I had just escaped a serial killer. Even now, writing it makes my heart race a bit. I never met up with him, but he begged me for multiple days after to meet up with him again. He ever asked to pay me $20 an hour to sit near me in the library. I declined, obviously, and only ever saw him once after at the gym on campus. He didn't see me, and I left immediately. I've thought about Dee occasionally since the date, and wondered if all those girls he had one-night stands with had the same experience I did. I still sometimes wonder how many girls there were after me.